Now, which city do you think is the most expensive to live in? London, Tokyo, Singapore, maybe New York? Well, according to the Economist Intelligence Unit, the world's dearest is now Tel Aviv in Israel. So what's it like to live in such an expensive city? Well, Hen Mazzig is a writer who's recently moved to London from Tel Aviv and joins us now. Afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
So good to talk to you. So Hen, compare London to Tel Aviv for us, because we think certainly in UK terms and international terms of London being quite an expensive city to live in.
That was exactly the outlook that I had living in Tel Aviv, and I thought that I have to prepare to it and save money and get ready. And as I'm moving here, everything was completely not what I imagined. The rent that I pay here for a 2-bedroom apartment, not in central London, we live in East London, but still, is almost as much as I paid for a studio apartment in south of Tel Aviv, which is less expensive. And I think many Israelis are feeling that, how expensive life is. And looking at London, I mean, from you have the options of going to several grocery stores and chains. In Israel, you have maybe 2 or 3 that are big ones. And the prices are almost similar. There was also a big controversy in Israel recently about some of those supermarket chains coordinating the prices between them. So that was a whole issue that is now being investigated. But yeah, it's definitely much more affordable to live in London. I wouldn't say it's cheap, but it's much more affordable.
It's amazing. And what about in Tel Aviv, things like even just, the price of a cup of coffee, for example? How does something like that compare?
Right. I think it's actually much more expensive in most places in Tel Aviv to get a cup of coffee than I'm thinking in London, even Pret or Costa or all the big coffee chains will be probably like 20% less to get a coffee there than in any cafe in Tel Aviv.
And I take it we're not just talking about people living, in sort of luxury beachfront apartments.
Yeah, it's a common misconception. I mentioned that I lived in the southern area of Tel Aviv that is more affordable, I would say, in many ways. And most of Tel Aviv is not on the beach line. Actually, on the beach line, you have most of the hotels and really expensive apartment buildings that most people most Israelis aren't even able to afford that. And we need to remember that Israel is becoming a high-tech hub that draws a lot of people from all over the world, from Facebook to Intel. I think Intel is developing more in Israel than anywhere else in the world, and that brings a lot of foreign investment and foreign investors. It's very similar to London, but there's also the aspect of it's a Jewish state, so many Jewish people from the diaspora are investing in the country and probably also own property in the country. I think they mentioned that 100,000 apartments in Tel Aviv are ghost apartments that people own and don't live in. So I think all of this contributes to what we're seeing today.
And what does it mean briefly for, young people working in Tel Aviv, even if they are in a fairly well-paid job?
It's really hard to finish the month in Tel Aviv if you have just a normal job. Most Israelis, and I know that many of my friends, young Israelis that live in Tel Aviv, are moving out of the city, and that's also a concern for the city itself, because part of the reason that Tel Aviv is drawing so many people is because of the nightlife and the young atmosphere, and that is very upbeat and fast. And I think that's why Tel Aviv is so unique in the Middle East. That's why it's also drawing a lot of people, but that might also be its flaw at the end.
Yeah, its downfall maybe. Okay, interesting. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us, Hen Mazzig there, who seems to be enjoying relative affordability in London.